Today on the Bar Business Podcast, uncover why despite growing tipping fatigue among customers and increasing discussions about no tipping models, less than 1% of U.S. bars and restaurants have successfully implemented no tipping policies, and explore how digital payment shifts have drastically changed tipping dynamics, with cash tips dropping to just 15% of all gratuities in 2025 compared to 30% of all gratuities in 2020. Welcome to the Bar Business Podcast, where we help bar owners increase profits, attract loyal guests, and simplify operations so you can avoid burnout and finally enjoy your life outside of your bar. I'm your host, Chris Schneider, the Bar Business Coach. So today we're diving into the evolving landscape of tipping in the bar industry. And this is something that I've avoided talking about because, frankly, there are a lot of strong opinions, and this is somewhat location-based. So we're seeing unprecedented shifts in tipping culture, and we have multiple forces creating pressure for change. Digital payments, a drop in cash tips, consumer tipping fatigue, and, frankly, increasing minimum wage in certain states. So this no tipping movement seems to be all over the internet, all over the news, but at the same time, less than 1% of establishments have successfully implemented no tipping. So there's a disconnect here in my mind between what we hear through the media and what people promote in the conversations and what actually happens. So first of all, let's get an idea of what's the reality of the tipping culture today. Well, standard bar tips pretty much remain about $1 to $2 per simple drink, or about 20% of the total bill. 20% is basically considered the benchmark now. Now, you do see some regional variations, and I found it interesting that West Virginia, New Hampshire, we're seeing tipping averages over 21%, while places with slightly higher minimum wage, say California and Washington, tipping is down to closer to 17% on average. And part of this is digital payment has transformed the way we tip. You know, you're not whipping out cash and rounding up or to make your tip. You are hitting a button on a computer. And one of the things that's happened with the button hitting on a computer and something that's given tipping a bad name is, generally speaking, with all POS systems, you get to choose 3 tip amounts. And most of them by default are 15, 18, 20, which I would never recommend. I would set up all my clients and when recommend to all my clients to make those 3 options, 18, 20, 22, or 18, 20, 25, so that you, like we've talked about before, give people a high number. They're going to pick the middle number, but make sure that middle number is 20 so that it doesn't seem like you're screwing them. You're just leading them to the right spot. But online and in the media, we see places that have gone like 20, 25, 40 and just have high tip rates that are really annoying people. And let's be honest here, when you push people to tip more by giving them a digital system that gives them the 3 basic options are way too high, you're hurting your guest experience. You're going to make people upset. You're going to annoy people. So the thing is that we need to provide reasonable options, not excessive options, so that our guests don't feel compelled to tip higher and then have a worse view of our establishment. Now, something that I think is interesting, and I don't know where this is, because in my local market, now I'm in a state that has very low minimum wage. We have federal minimum wage, the lowest you can have in the United States for tipped employees. And frankly, the restaurants and bars I talk to and work with locally, I'm seeing tipping at 25, 30% a lot of times. But in general across the country, and I think this is largely due to higher minimum wage in places like California, New York, Washington, we've seen a decline in people tipping above 20%. So in 2020, it was about 56% of people, and in 2024, it was about 38% of people that tipped above 20%. And that's probably because about 60% of consumers right now are expressing this tipping fatigue or frustration with expanding tipping. And that's another thing. Let's be honest here. A lot of the online hate against tipping is not at us in the bar industry or against restaurants. It's against dog groomers and hair salons and mechanics and people that traditionally were tipped but not necessarily as much, or, you know, in some cases weren't tipped at all, where now they have their system asking for tips. So by going cashless, by going more digital, we've created situations where more people ask for tips, they're asking for higher tips, and that's what's led to this pushback. But we don't have to fall into that. Because in reality, like I mentioned at the top, the no tipping movement, it's really more hype than reality. And you see a lot of advocates, you see a lot of noise. But if we look at where has this successfully been implemented, no tipping? New York, San Francisco, Seattle. Oh, where are the highest minimum wage rates in the United States? Pretty much there. So what we can see is where people have a high minimum wage, there's more pressure against tipping. Where people have a low minimum wage, tipping is still thriving and going fantastically. So you're going to have to be a little careful based upon your geography in determining how you handle tipping. Now, something is very true that I just want to point out from a math perspective. High minimum wage and lower tipping does not mean that servers make more necessarily. And when you have a higher minimum wage or higher staff wage and you discount tipping, as a business, what you're going to end up with is higher menu prices. So if we take Union Square Hospitality Group, Danny Meyer, a freaking brilliant dude, one of the most successful restaurateurs in the entire country. He attempted to go no tipping, and it failed. They had to go back to a traditional tipping system because their customers didn't want to pay the higher menu prices. Because when you go online and you're looking at menus, or when you're going on DoorDash, Grubhub, going to order food, you're going to see way higher prices at one spot and way lower prices at one spot. People in their heads, they're not adding that 20% in that they would tip. They're just looking at prices and still thinking, oh, I have to tip on top of that. So no tipping venues are always going to face a competitive disadvantage because their menu prices appear higher. Now, if you're in one of those places like New York or San Francisco, maybe that's not a big deal because a lot of other people are doing it. It's not culturally weird. But if you're in the middle of Kentucky and your prices are 20% higher than everybody else because you pay your staff more, yeah, people probably ain't going to see that and understand it. So where you are in the United States, again, is going to culturally determine how you need to address tipping. Now, there is some benefit to going no tipping or to looking at, even tip sharing between front and back of house to provide more equitable pay. However, you can always pay your front of house people less and your back of house people more hourly and do the same thing. And you can do that math and work that out. And that's how I always did it. That's the more traditional way to do it. So there's no reason to force no tipping or tip sharing necessarily, but tip sharing can be a great way to improve morale, decrease turnover, and get better teamwork. So you have to balance that based upon your individual concept, your location, and your team. So let's talk through some practical strategies. One is be transparent about your tipping policy. Whether it is no tip, tips included, there's a service charge, whatever. Make sure that you are very transparent and make sure it's on your menu. Make sure you do staff training. Make sure that there's signage if you need it. But you want your guests to understand exactly what the tipping expectations are. If they deviate from the standard, you come in, you tip 20%. On your POS system, when you're giving people tip options, make sure that you are providing them reasonable options like 18, 20, 22, 18, 20, 20, 25, not ridiculous options like 20, 25, 30. Consider how you're going to handle tip payouts because, we used to do these night of because we had a lot more cash than we do today. So oftentimes it doesn't make sense to do tip payouts night of, but determine whether or not you're going to try to do that through like a debit card system where the money gets transferred to a debit card every night, whether you're going to do that through some kind of ACH transfer system that's nightly, or you're just going to put it on paychecks. For a lot of people, putting it on paychecks is the right call, but think through all those and the impact on your team. I mean, obviously, if you go from paying out tips nightly to paying them out every week or every other week on a paycheck, that's going to require your team to have better financial management. And nothing against servers and bartenders, because I used to be one, but not necessarily the best. And I know when I was in my 20s and serving and bartending, that cash, some of it got saved, but a lot of it went to drinking that night, and I like to go out and spend my money as I earned it. So work with your team if you're going to change the way that you're handling tip payouts to make sure that they are aware and they're set up to be able to manage their money efficiently. If you go about experimenting with service charges, again, make sure you communicate it clearly and communicate to your customers who that service charge goes to. I mean, one of the things you see online a lot is they say, well, there's a service charge, but the server doesn't get it. Well, I think that's kind of just morally ambiguous because you're marketing one thing and doing another. But B, you really should make sure that your guests understand what they're paying, why they're paying, and how that gets distributed so that they know whether or not they need to tip more or whether or not that service charge is enough. So the tipping landscape, in conclusion, is rapidly evolving, and traditional tipping remains deeply ingrained in our bar culture. I don't think that's going to change anytime soon, but we are going to see more and more move, especially in places that have these higher and increasing minimum wages, towards no tipping, service charges, things of that nature. So while remaining flexible enough to adapt to your customer expectations, you need to make sure that you're also taking care of your team. Most successful bars are going to thoughtfully address tipping through clear communication, reasonable digital prompts on your tipping recommendations, and outstanding service that genuinely warrants a gratuity. Remind yourself that all this conversation about tipping, we haven't talked at all today about whether or not you deserve it, but make sure you deserve the tips that you're getting. And remember, regardless of how you decide to address tipping in your bar, the fundamentals of hospitality will never change. You have to create a memorable experience, you have to foster genuine guest connections, and you have to deliver value so that you can have a successful bar.
That about wraps it up for today. If you enjoyed today's insights, make sure you like, subscribe, and leave a review. If you are ready to take your bar to the next level, schedule a strategy session with me by clicking the link in the show notes below. Until next time, have a great day, and we will talk again later.